Welcome back to Capital Connection. David Costa, Dean of Robert Kennedy College, joins us now live from Zurich. David, thanks very much for joining us. I think let's kick it off with the fact that Mr. Schäuble managed to shoot down any kind of positive expectation someone might have had out on the street. But again, you've got people around the world pressurizing the Germans to not take the solution off track. They're not listening.
Good morning. Well, yes, it looks like we are always making one step ahead and two steps behind, because when we really feel, and that was last time I was here on air, that really there was a moment of change in the banking where there was this intention of Europe to provide with some sort of security to the market. Now we have again two steps back, and that I think add a lot of uncertainties to a very nervous market, and probably that's a signal that the Germans want to exploit this particular moment to force other European economies to more austerity, to more instruments, to more ways to really put their acts together. And they know that if they're going to make too many concessions now and come out with a big, quick solution, that is not going to solve the long-term problem. So on one side, you have to understand that that's pretty much part of the game to impose more rigor throughout Europe.
Well, David, it seems like we're putting all the onus on the banks, and many people will think rightly so. But if we're talking bigger haircuts for the banks, the IIF doesn't believe it's a good thing. They have a position there that they have to keep to. What exactly is a solution, if not bigger haircuts for the banks and other private holders?
This is very delicate. The reason why there is now this need to have bigger haircuts for banks is because if there isn't a voluntary participation, let's put between brackets voluntary, of the banks, then this might trigger what is really the Greek default, and a lot of credit default swap will be triggered from this event. It will cause an event. That's why they are forced to ask for more haircuts. Do I think that this is right? No. I think that's very dangerous, because by imposing more haircuts, which they are talking even up to 50%, there is a danger that many of those very fragile banks will be forced to be nationalized. So I think imposing even more penalty to an already agreed deal in July to the private sector is very dangerous and can create an even bigger crisis when some of the banks which are weaker will be forced to ask for government intervention because they won't be able to raise capital. So that, I think, is something politicians have to be very careful about and really find a different way, because this really web of, let's say, slow motion de facto default is very damaging for the markets and for European banks as well.
And David, won't that just spark a ripple effect across Europe if the banks are forced to take write-downs of 50% on some of these bond holdings? Then bondholders in other markets are going to go, well, I'm out of here.
Well, that's really difficult to say, but of course it can cause a very negative effect. I think the initial project we have now is to impose harder haircuts, but sort of to segregate those haircuts, to limit those to Greece, and give some sort of insurance that that's not going to happen for Portugal, Ireland, or other economies in Europe. So that's what is now, I think, on the table, on the discussion. But I'm not convinced that that's possible, and I think the stability of European banks is paramount in this crisis. Until we see some stronger stability, some of a bigger rally, we have seen it in the last 2 weeks, but it's not holding up, a bigger rally on the banks, more stability, more transparency as well, more investors coming in, the crisis will not be over. So it could cause a ripple effect, particularly for those weak banks that cannot support a 50% haircut.
Okay, let's talk about opportunities. You think that some European financials are attractive. Do tell.
Well, I think the sector is highly penalized. It has been largely oversold beside the last couple of weeks. But there are many banks, particularly regional banks in some European countries, which have no exposure whatsoever to this big mess. Even in Switzerland, we have some of the regional cantonal banks which have very little exposure to all those issues, but at the same time are now priced at a very attractive valuation. So even the sector and traders particularly tend to short the whole sector. It's still seen very negatively. You might find some diamonds in the rough there, particularly if you look carefully on quality banks which have a sustainable business model and very little exposure to the sovereign debt crisis.
Yeah, David, very quickly, give us your take on the earnings season and how it's likely to progress, and your translation of what it means for the economy.
Mixed bag, we are in slow growth, we have to expect that, but at the same time we are not in a recession. I don't think a recession in America or Europe will be coming, but slow growth will be there.
David, appreciate it. You always know how to give a very quick answer. David Costa there, Dean of Robert Kennedy College, live from Zurich. In the meantime, we're going to take a look at those